A streak of light blazed across the night sky, cutting through the silence like a knife. It burned with unnatural speed, a comet from the void, tumbling and spinning toward Earth's surface. The trail of fire vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and the world was left in eerie stillness. Until the crash. The ground trembled, and the earth beneath it groaned, as though something ancient was waking from a long slumber. A violent explosion shattered the stillness, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. Trees shook and fell. Rocks cracked and splintered. The sky lit up with an orange glow as the strange craft plummeted from the heavens, crashing into the dense forest with a deafening roar. The wreckage lay in a shattered heap, twisted and broken, deep within the wilderness. The ship, once sleek and powerful, was now a mangled carcass. Its hull crumpled like paper, smoldering in the aftermath of the fiery descent. Silence returned, though it was a heavy, expectant kind of quiet, the kind that felt like a breath held for far too long. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, faintly, a figure emerged from the wreckage. Weak, fragile. A small alien girl, her skin pale with an eerie, almost glowing tint, stumbled out from beneath the burning remnants of her ship. She could barely stand, her knees buckling beneath her as she collapsed onto the charred ground. Her breathing was ragged, shallow, as if the very air was foreign to her. Her eyes, wide with fear, flickered open and closed. There was something unnervingly delicate about her. This was not a creature made for Earth. She was something else entirely. And then, through the thick trees, a shadow loomed. Hulk stepped into the clearing, his massive form a hulking silhouette against the smoke and flames. His green skin glistened in the light, muscles rippling beneath him with each step. He stood tall, the very earth seeming to bow beneath his weight, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto the small, helpless creature on the ground. She looked up at him, her face streaked with dirt and blood, eyes wide with confusion and fear. In the blink of an eye, Hulk was at her side, towering over her like a mountain, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither moved. The air was thick with tension. Two beings from entirely different worlds, meeting in a place where neither truly belonged. The girl flinched as Hulk crouched down beside her, his hand large enough to cover her entire torso. He didn't speak. He never did when he was like this. His eyes, however, softened, just for a split second. Without a word, Hulk reached into the wreckage and pulled out what was left of the ship, scanning for any signs of life. The girl's breathing was slow, labored. He knew she wasn't from here. The faint glimmer of something foreign in her eyes, the strange markings on her skin. He could feel it. Her hand twitched, reaching out weakly toward him. Hulk hesitated, then with surprising gentleness, placed his massive hand on her trembling form, cradling her in a way that seemed almost protective. He lifted her carefully, making sure she didn't fall. She was light in his arms, fragile like a doll made of glass. Hulk looked down at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The sounds of distant footsteps, human voices, grew nearer. He knew they would be coming soon. The military, the government, they would want answers. But as Hulk looked down at the girl in his arms, he couldn't help but feel something more than just duty, something more than the anger he usually carried. For once, there was a quiet resolve in his chest. No one would take her from him. Not now. Not while she was this fragile. And so, with a glance toward the horizon, Hulk turned away from the approaching danger. He didn't know who this girl was or why she had come. But one thing was certain. She was his responsibility now. And no one would hurt her. Not while he was here. The journey had just begun. The forest was silent except for the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, fresh and heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Hulk carried the alien girl carefully through the dense trees, his massive steps making the ground tremble beneath him. She lay in his arms, her small form still and fragile, barely clinging to consciousness. He could feel her heartbeat, faint but steady, against his chest. Her skin, cool to the touch, seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the forest. Every time she shifted, it was as though she was trying to understand where she was, or who she was. Hulk didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because words often failed him. The girl had not spoken a single word since he found her. Her eyes were wide, full of fear and confusion. Her lips parted as if she wanted to ask something but couldn't. It bothered Hyolke, this quiet emptiness between them. She was not just a stranger. She was something different, and it was clear that the universe had thrown them together for a reason, even if neither of them understood it yet. He took her to the small cabin he had built deep in the forest, a place far from human eyes. It was simple, just a wooden structure with a few basic comforts, but it was all he needed. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows against the walls. The air was warm here, far from the cold night outside. Carefully, he laid the girl down on the worn couch. She stirred in his arms but didn't wake, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Hulk stepped back, eyes scanning her for any sign of further injury. There was nothing. She was just tired, broken. As he watched her, his mind raced. Why had she come here? Who had sent her? And why Earth? His thoughts were interrupted by a low groan from the girl. She shifted on the couch, her eyes fluttering open, the glow in them dimming as they adjusted to the light. She blinked a few times, confused, before locking eyes with him. Hulk stood motionless, waiting. It took a moment, but then her voice, a soft, barely audible whisper, broke the silence. Where? Hulk stared at her for a long time. The question wasn't much, but it was the first sign of life, the first connection they'd had since he'd found her. Earth, he muttered, his voice a low rumble. You're on Earth. Her eyes widened, her hand instinctively reaching out, fingers trembling. She wanted to speak again, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Hulk noticed the fear in her eyes, a fear not just of the strange place, but of the overwhelming weight of being somewhere so unfamiliar. She didn't belong here. Without thinking, Hulk knelt down beside her, his large hand hovering near hers, but not touching. She seemed to hesitate for a moment before her fingers slowly curled into his palm, a silent request for comfort. It was strange how easily she trusted him. He wasn't someone who was used to being trusted, but something about her vulnerability, made him want to protect her, something that went beyond his usual instincts. She pulled her hand away after a moment, sitting up with a wince, trying to steady herself. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in her surroundings. She looked at the fire, the cabin, the strange world that had swallowed her whole. Her gaze met his again, and this time there was a flicker of something else. Recognition, or perhaps something deeper. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The words were simple, but to Hyolke, they felt heavier than they should. He didn't expect gratitude. He didn't need it. He just knew he couldn't leave her alone out there. Not when she was so lost. Rest, Hulk said, his voice softer than usual. He wasn't used to speaking like this, but something about her made him want to try. You're safe. The girl nodded, a tired, grateful smile tugging at the corners of her lips before she closed her eyes, sinking back into the couch. As she drifted off to sleep, Hulk remained by her side, ever watchful. The bond had begun, small and fragile, like the girl herself, but it was there. And for the first time in a long while, Hulk didn't feel so alone. The days blurred together like a fading dream, a steady rhythm of quiet mornings and long, silent afternoons. The cabin was a haven in the wilderness, far from the prying eyes of the world, and Hulk kept it that way. His new companion, the alien girl, had begun to show signs of recovery. Her strength was returning, and so too were the flickers of memory that seemed to stir in her eyes. But still, she couldn't remember who she was or why she had come to Earth. Each day, she would sit by the fire, her hands pressed against her temples, as if trying to force the pieces of a shattered puzzle back together. Hulk never pushed her to speak. He simply watched, patient, as she wrestled with the fog in her mind. Then, one evening, just as the sun began to set and the sky shifted to a deep shade of purple, she spoke. I remember. Her voice was quiet, as if testing the words before they left her mouth. She looked at Hulk, really looked at him, her gaze piercing, searching for understanding. I remember a crown. The word hung in the air, heavy with something ancient and forgotten. Hulk tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. A crown. He didn't understand, but something in the way she said it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. She continued, her voice trembling as the memories started to slip through the cracks in her mind. The throne. A home far from here. My people. I was someone. I was. Her breath caught in her throat, and she winced, clutching at her chest, as if the memories themselves were too much to bear. Hulk stepped forward, his large hands hovering near her, unsure if he should touch her. But she reached out to him instead, her hand trembling as it found his. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. I was a princess, she whispered. The words felt like a weight falling between them. Princess. The word was foreign, yet somehow familiar. It felt like the missing piece of a puzzle, a piece that might make sense of everything. But Hulk had no way of knowing what any of it meant. A princess. From where? What happened? Hulk asked, his voice low and gruff. He wasn't used to asking questions, but he needed to know. Her eyes darkened as she pulled her hand away, staring into the fire. It's all shattered. I remember. Her eyes flicked to the window, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room. My home was destroyed. My people, they died. All because of him. Who? Hulk asked, his tone more urgent now. Whoever had hurt her, whatever had happened, he wanted to know. This was no ordinary girl. She wasn't just some lost soul from another planet. She was royalty, and her past was as heavy as the stars themselves. She clenched her fists in her lap, her jaw tightening. My uncle. He betrayed us, killed my family, took the throne. I was sent away, exiled. Hulk felt something shift inside him. Something cold, something familiar. He knew betrayal. He knew what it felt like to be abandoned, cast aside by those who were supposed to protect you. He didn't know her pain, but he understood it. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze, steady now, with a fire in her eyes. I was supposed to be the queen, but he destroyed everything. And now, I have nothing. Hulk didn't speak. He didn't need to. His heart felt heavy, but there was something else, something fierce and determined that burned in his chest. The girl, the princess, needed to reclaim what was lost. And somehow, Hulk knew that it was his responsibility to help her. As the fire crackled in the hearth, the tension between them thickened. She had been broken once, but she wasn't broken now. And Hulk, though he didn't understand everything about her world or her past, knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. I'll help you, Hulk said, his voice low but unwavering. We'll take it back, whatever it takes. Her eyes softened, the smallest flicker of hope igniting within them. For the first time, she smiled, not with fear, but with purpose. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a queen in exile. And perhaps, just perhaps, her kingdom had not been completely lost. And together, they would fight to reclaim it. The morning broke with a harsh wind that howled through the trees. The sky, a dim gray canvas, stretched over the wilderness. The peace of the cabin felt fragile now, like the calm before a storm. Hulk stood at the doorway, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his sharp eyes scanning the distant line of trees for any sign of movement. Beside him, the princess, no longer just a girl but a leader in the making, watched too. She had become stronger, her memories sharpening with each passing day. But now there was a weight to her eyes, a tension that pulled at the edges of her expression. Her past was catching up to her. We need to leave, she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "My uncle's forces. They're coming. I can feel it." Hulk nodded without a word. He had known this moment was coming. There was no escaping it. The girl, the princess, had been marked the moment her ship crashed. Her uncle, the ruthless warlord who had destroyed her world, wouldn't stop until he found her. He would burn everything in his path, and Earth was no exception. The princess's hand clenched into a fist, her knuckles white. She stood straighter, the resolve in her posture unmistakable. This wasn't the fragile girl who had stumbled into his arms weeks ago. She was becoming the queen she had been meant to be. "We'll fight," she said, determination hardening her voice. "I won't run anymore." Hulk grunted in acknowledgement, though he knew the battle ahead would be fierce. His mind raced with strategies and possibilities, but he didn't speak them aloud. He didn't need to. He knew what he had to do. Without another word, he turned and began gathering supplies. The cabin, which had once felt like a safe haven, now felt like a cage. The princess followed, silently watching as he prepared. He grabbed weapons, things he'd stashed away for emergencies, and began to load them onto a makeshift cart. The sound of metal clinking against metal was the only noise in the otherwise quiet cabin. The princess moved to his side, eyes flicking to the map of the area that Hulk had spread across the table. She studied it, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We'll need more than just force," she said, her voice thoughtful. "We'll need to unite the human resistance. My uncle, he's not just a man with an army. He's a warlord who commands entire fleets. Earth doesn't stand a chance unless—" "I know," Hulk interrupted, his voice deep and unyielding. "But we don't need to take him all at once. We fight where we can win. We make them believe in you." Her eyes met his, the weight of his words settling between them. She nodded, the tiniest spark of hope flickering in her gaze. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They didn't have much time. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling in violent gusts as the first signs of an invasion began to show. Black shapes appeared on the horizon, distant but unmistakable. Ships, sleek and deadly, dropped from the sky like shadows, their engines humming with an eerie precision. Hulk's eyes narrowed, and the princess stiffened at the sight. "This is it," she said, her voice low but certain. "We need to move now." With a swift nod, Hulk lifted the cart, and together they moved toward the forest edge. The trees around them seemed to tremble in anticipation, as though the earth itself could feel the coming storm. The wind howled through the canopy, bending branches in unnatural directions, and the distant rumble of alien ships grew louder. The princess's gaze turned toward the sky, her expression hardening. "I will not let him destroy everything again," she muttered, more to herself than to Hulk. "Not this time." Hulk didn't reply. He didn't need to. The time for words had passed. Now they would make their stand. As the first wave of alien soldiers began to drop into the forest, their dark figures silhouetted against the sky, Hulk crouched low, his muscles tensing like coiled springs. The princess stood beside him, a silent warrior, ready to face whatever came next. The storm was here, and they would meet it head-on. The fight for Earth, and for her kingdom, had begun. The air was thick with tension, as though the very sky itself was holding its breath. The alien ships, dark and ominous, hovered just above the treetops, their engines pulsing with an unnatural hum. Hulk crouched low in the underbrush, the forest around him shivering with every step he took. His muscles were coiled, ready for the fight to come. Beside him, the princess stood tall, her expression a mixture of defiance and focus. She was no longer the fragile, lost girl who had arrived in his arms. She was a leader, a queen, and now she was ready to reclaim her throne. "Are you ready?" Hulk rumbled, his voice low but steady, the words barely breaking the silence. The princess nodded without hesitation. "We'll make them see who we are." Hulk grunted in approval. They didn't have the luxury of time. The alien forces were already beginning to deploy. their soldiers dropping from the ships in tight formation. The sounds of their boots hitting the earth were muffled by the thick canopy above, but the unnatural gleam of their armor shone in the faint light. They were organized, military-trained, and deadly. But Hulk didn't fear them. He was ready. As the first group of soldiers approached, he stood up with a speed that belied his size, the ground shaking under his weight. He let out a battle cry, his voice echoing through the forest like a primal roar. The alien soldiers froze for a moment, their eyes wide with surprise. They hadn't expected this. Without another thought, Hulk charged forward, his massive fists slamming into the ground. The earth cracked beneath him, sending a shockwave through the forest that knocked several of the soldiers off their feet. They scrambled to recover, but it was too late. Hulk was already upon them. With a speed and power that left no room for mercy, Hulk unleashed a barrage of punches, each strike sending shockwaves through the air. His fists collided with the soldiers' armor, crushing it like paper and sending them flying backward. They fired their energy weapons, but the blasts bounced off his skin like raindrops off a rock. The princess, not one to stand idly by, moved swiftly through the chaos, her eyes flashing with determination. She wasn't just a bystander in this battle. She was a warrior. Using the skills she had learned during her exile, she disarmed one of the soldiers, her movements quick and precise. She twisted the weapon from his grasp, using the momentum to knock him to the ground. The soldiers, now realizing they were facing more than just a simple resistance, regrouped, forming a defensive line. The princess didn't hesitate. She sprinted forward, leaping over fallen branches and rocks, and slammed into the nearest soldier, knocking him to the ground. Her eyes burned with the fire of someone who had lost everything, and would stop at nothing to get it back. Hulk, meanwhile, was a force of nature. He tore through the enemy ranks, ripping through their armor with ease. He grabbed one soldier by the leg, swinging him around and using him to take down another group. The soldiers fired relentlessly, but their weapons were ineffective against Hulk's thick skin and raw strength. "Stay close," Hulk muttered to the princess as he cleared a path through the chaos. His tone was a warning, even though she didn't need it. She was a fighter now, a force in her own right. They were in this together. The battle raged on, the sounds of clashing metal and exploding energy weapons filling the air. But even with the overwhelming force of the alien invaders, something shifted. Hulk and the princess were not just two warriors in a fight. They were symbols, rallying the resistance that had begun to form in the shadows. As the first alien ship began to land, a loud rumble echoed through the clearing. Hulk turned to face it, a grin tugging at the corner of his lips. He had dealt with bigger threats before, but this was personal. The princess stood by his side, her eyes burning with resolve. "Let's finish this." The two of them, side by side, faced the incoming storm. The battle was just beginning, and the fight for Earth, and for her kingdom, was far from over. But one thing was certain: they would not back down. Not now. Not ever. The battle was reaching its peak. The sky, once clear and open, was now filled with the hum of alien ships, their dark forms blotting out the sun. The air crackled with the energy of the fight, blasts of energy flying in every direction. The sound of metal clashing against metal, and the relentless roar of Hulk charging through the enemy ranks like an unstoppable force. But even as he tore through the alien soldiers, there was something different in the air now. The tension was palpable, the realization settling in that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming a throne, a kingdom lost to betrayal. And for the princess standing beside him, this was personal. Hulk could see it in her eyes, her drive, her purpose. She wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. She was fighting for everything she had lost. "Stay close," Hulk called out, his voice carrying over the noise of the battlefield. He swung his massive fists, sending a wave of soldiers scattering, but his eyes never left her. She was fast, moving with purpose, her movements sharp and precise. She had become a warrior in the truest sense of the word. The princess didn't need reminding. She was in the thick of it now, her face set in a grim expression as she cut through the enemy lines. With a fluid motion, she disarmed one soldier, sending him to the ground in a heap before turning her attention to another. Her mind was focused, her body moving with an agility that seemed unnatural for someone who had once been a princess in hiding. But the world had changed, and so had she. Behind them, the resistance forces were beginning to rally, their numbers swelling as more and more people joined the fight. They weren't just ordinary soldiers. They were survivors, fighters, rebels united under the banner of a princess who had been forgotten by her own people, but was now leading them into battle once again. The alien invaders, sensing the shift in momentum, regrouped, calling in reinforcements. But even as the enemy's numbers grew, HFY and the princess pushed forward, never slowing, never faltering. Every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's power, closer to the command ship that loomed in the distance, its massive form casting a long shadow over the battlefield. "We can take it down," the princess said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She looked up at Hulk, her eyes burning with determination. "We need to stop their command. If we take out their leader, the rest will scatter." Hulk nodded, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of approval. Perhaps the princess had a plan, and she wasn't afraid to execute it. Together, they fought their way through the heart of the enemy's forces, every step calculated, every move executed with precision. The alien soldiers, despite their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers, were no match for the sheer force of HFY and the resolve of the princess. Each blow they struck echoed across the battlefield, sending shockwaves through the ground. As they neared the command ship, a massive explosion rocked the ground beneath them, sending a shockwave that knocked them both off their feet. Dust and debris filled the air, the world around them momentarily swallowed by the chaos. When the dust finally settled, HFY and the princess were back on their feet, determination written across their faces. The command ship loomed just ahead, its sleek exterior gleaming in the dim light of the battle. "It's now or never," the princess said, her voice unwavering. Hulk grunted in agreement, his fists clenched. They were close, closer than they had ever been to winning this battle. But there was one final challenge to face, and the two of them would face it together. With a final rallying cry, Hulk surged forward, his massive form charging toward the command ship. The princess was right beside him, every step in sync with his. They were a force to be reckoned with, and nothing, not even the might of an alien invasion, could stop them now. The final confrontation was upon them, and nothing would stand in their way. The ground shook beneath their feet as HFY and the princess charged toward the looming command ship. Its sleek, metallic surface reflected the chaos unfolding below, a stark contrast to the destruction surrounding it. The air hummed with the sound of energy weapons firing, and the sky above was thick with the shadow of enemy reinforcements descending from the clouds. But in that moment, nothing else mattered to HFY. His focus was razor-sharp, his mission clear. Beside him, the princess's presence was undeniable. She moved with a quiet, fierce determination, every step measured as though she had been born for this moment. The fire in her eyes was a stark contrast to the cold, clinical calculations of the alien forces, and it was that fire that drove her forward. "We're almost there," she said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming odds. Hulk nodded, his massive frame charging ahead, scattering the last line of alien soldiers with ease. His fists tore through their defenses, sending them flying, their armor no match for his sheer power. He didn't need to look back to know the princess was right behind him, cutting down enemies with swift, precise strikes. She wasn't a helpless girl anymore. She was a queen in battle, and every action she took reflected that. As they reached the base of the command ship, Hulk let out a roar that seemed to shake the very ground. The doors to the ship slid open, and from within emerged the figure they had been hunting, the alien warlord, her uncle. His face was cold, cruel, a stark reflection of the tyrant who had destroyed her world. His armor gleamed darkly, and in his hand he held a weapon of unimaginable power, a gauntlet that pulsed with dark energy, the same energy that had wiped out her people. "Hulk, Princess," the warlord said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I knew you would come for me, eventually. You always were predictable." The princess's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a cold, determined smile. "You destroyed everything I loved. You took my people, my home, but you will not take this from me." The warlord chuckled, a sound that sent chills down the spine. "You think you can stop me? You and your brute," he sneered, glancing at Hulk. "Your strength is impressive, but it won't be enough." Hulk growled low in his throat, stepping forward. "We'll see about that." Without warning, the warlord raised his gauntlet, unleashing a blast of dark energy straight at Hulk. The force was enough to send the ground splintering beneath their feet. Hulk staggered back, his skin glowing momentarily from the impact, but he didn't fall. He never fell. With a roar, he charged, his immense frame bulldozing through the blast, his fists crashing into the warlord's defense. The force of his strike was like a thunderclap, and the warlord staggered back, clearly stunned. But the warlord wasn't finished. He swung his gauntlet again, releasing another surge of dark energy. But this time, the princess was ready. She leaped into action, using her agility to dodge the blast and close the distance between them. In one fluid motion, she disarmed the warlord, sending the gauntlet flying into the air. She caught it mid-flight, her eyes locked onto the warlord's. "You've lost," she said, her voice cold, but filled with a quiet power. The warlord's face twisted with rage. "You think you've won. You think I'll let you take back what's mine." Before he could react, Hulk was upon him, his fist landing with a thunderous punch that sent the warlord flying backward, his body slamming into the ship's hull. The princess stood beside him, her breath steady, the gauntlet still clutched in her hand. "You're not a king anymore," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "You're nothing." With that, the princess raised the gauntlet high, and as it hummed with dark power, she slammed it down onto the ground, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. The earth trembled, and the command ship groaned as though it were alive, buckling under the weight of the power she had unleashed. The warlord, defeated, lay motionless, the power of his own weapon turned against him. And as the dust settled around them, Hulk and the princess stood side by side, their backs straight and their eyes on the horizon. The battle was over. The kingdom was hers again. But this victory was just the beginning. The galaxy would know the name of the princess who had risen from the ashes, and the warrior who had helped her reclaim everything. The dust of the battlefield still hung in the air, heavy with the scent of scorched earth and broken metal. The command ship, once towering and invincible, now lay in ruins, its twisted remains scattered across the landscape. The alien warlord, the man who had once been a king, was nothing more than a shadow now, crushed by his own ambition, his dreams of conquest shattered. Standing amidst the wreckage, Hulk and the princess surveyed the scene. Around them, the remnants of the alien forces were either fleeing or surrendering. The air was thick with the sound of distant sirens, the clamor of the resistance fighters securing the area, and the murmurs of people beginning to understand that they had won. Earth was safe, for now. The princess, her armor still dusted with the grime of battle, looked at the horizon. The sky, once darkened by the threat of invasion, was now clearing, the first rays of the sun breaking through the clouds. It was a symbol, a promise, a new beginning. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. She had always been the girl who dreamed of a better world, but now she stood as the leader who had made it happen. Hulk gave a low grunt, stepping beside her. His enormous frame cast a shadow over her as he looked out at the land that stretched before them. The battle had been fierce, but the real war was just beginning. There would be no going back to the quiet life they had once shared in the cabin. The galaxy would not forget the name of the princess who had risen from the ashes, and Hulk knew that there would be challenges ahead. "You're not just a princess anymore," Hulk said, his voice deep but not unkind. "You're a queen. And queens don't just rule kingdoms, they protect them. You've got a lot of work ahead." The princess turned her gaze toward him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I know, but I'm not alone." Hulk chuckled, the sound deep and rumbling. "No, you're not. But even a queen needs an army, and it looks like you've got one." Around them, the remnants of the resistance had begun to regroup. Soldiers and civilians alike were picking up the pieces of the battle, but their faces were full of hope, their movements energized. They had fought for something real, something worth protecting. One of the resistance commanders approached, saluting the princess with a newfound respect. "Your Highness, we've secured the perimeter. The enemy is retreating, but we'll need to rebuild. The war might be over, but the peace will be harder to maintain." The princess nodded. "I understand. We'll rebuild together. We'll make sure this never happens again." Hulk watched her, a rare moment of admiration in his eyes. The princess was right. She wasn't just a symbol of hope anymore. She was the embodiment of it. And he, despite the battles, the bloodshed, and the destruction, was proud to have fought by her side. But even as the calm began to settle in, Hulk knew there was one final thing that still needed to be done. His gaze turned to the stars above, the vastness of space stretching out before him. "There are other threats out there," he said, his voice soft but heavy with the weight of experience. "The galaxy doesn't know peace. Not yet." The princess looked up, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. "I'll make sure they know we're ready." With that, the two of them stood side by side, watching as the first steps of their new world began to take shape. Hulk wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a protector, a mentor, and perhaps, in time, a friend. The princess had come far, but the journey wasn't over. They had made history together, but now, it was time to shape the future. Together, they would lead. Together, they would rebuild. And the galaxy would never be the same again. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its golden light across the world, the first true dawn of peace broke over Earth, and a new era began.